So it seems to be the case that people doubt open individualism very strongly. And that is a symptom of being trapped within human territory. So the sum of our being, it obviously exists in vastly, vastly different mind configurations than just the human variety of it. But when you're trapped within the fragmented, shattered world of humanity, you have a hard time conceiving of the other as fundamentally self in the sense that matters, in the sense that experience it only exists from where it is located, and therefore there is no death, therefore there is no separation of fundamental beings. There are no souls, there is just experience. And the way to try to motivate this, one of the approaches, is to get people to realize just how ridiculous the opposite view is, how it would be miraculous and unexplainable to account for why you find yourself where you find yourself as opposed to anywhere else. So consider the fact that the universe is 13.79999 plus or minus 0.000 something 21. I don't know how many zeros, but 00021 billion years old. So essentially 13.8 billion. Now that may sound like a lot to you. Like you may think that's a tremendous amount because again, you think of a world with 75-year-old people and trees and cats and dogs and apples and stuff, and you think 13.8 billion years old, that's a tremendous amount of time. But actually, the universe just began. It is going to go on for hundreds of trillions of years, where activity is going to be happening, planets are forming, orbiting stars, galaxies all over the place, containing and teeming with life, which inevitably arises just given the size of the universe. So no one thinks that our universe ends at our Hubble volume. So our Hubble volume is that area of the universe that you can see from your center. Anything beyond that, you can never even have information reach from there. And dark energy is expanding everything. So increasingly, you're not going to be, all these portions are going to be separated from each other more and more and more. So more information is exiting from your Hubble volume as time goes on. But nonetheless, we know that the universe itself exists at large. You know, this is not the sum of existence. Even though you can't actually ever reach anything in principle, we know that the universe continues. So we don't know if it has bounds or if it is absolutely, truly infinite. And regardless of the case, you would have to account not only for why you are born at the very beginning, why you are that particular person at the very birth of this all, and why you are in that location as opposed to any other location. And that's just the beginning, because that's just a level 1 to the universe. Level 2 to the universe takes into account chaotic inflation, which leads to different embryonic bubble universes that have their own physical constants. And so you're going to have universes that are completely different than this one. And again, how do you account for being a mind within this, embedded within this kind of universe as opposed to embedded within some other kind of universe? And that's not it. The third level to the multiverse in the Tegmark classification is many worlds. So if you go into that discussion, at first it sounds crazy, but if you actually learn quantum mechanics and engage with that discussion long enough, you will probably become convinced, just as I did, that pilot waves, the Copenhagen collapse postulate, or the hidden variable theories are not acceptable alternatives. And in fact, the hidden variable theory has been experimentally tested against and refuted, whereas a Copenhagen interpretation is just ad hoc. It's just you're imposing it upon the actual mechanism of itself, the actual Schrodinger equation. you're imposing something extra, which does not arise from the physics itself, but is something that you have to invoke in order to account for your solipsistic intuition, that only you exist, and that other realities must not exist. And so we try it at all costs. It is, for humans, it's very, very hard to not think solipsistically, because your mind is set up that way. It's set up to model itself as bound and only self-existing. So, and okay, that should at least give you cause to think that this is a problem. It would be a miracle to think, I exist where I exist. I find myself in the location that I find myself in, but not others, out of all possible locations that I could have found myself. If you are engaging with sort of more normal people who don't think about cosmology, who have never thought about theoretical physics, it's very hard with them to approach from this direction, because they could sort of put it out of their minds and think that this sounds all crazy, this sounds crazy, so it must be crazy. And, they have a very small worldview in which things are simple, things are what they see, and they think that they could somehow ignore cosmology, ignore the big picture. So to them, you might appeal by suggesting, instead of possible mind configurations across the entire multiverse, you might suggest, think of all the possible humans that you could have been across the history of the Earth, right? Like, you could have been some random girl in the Sassanid Empire. You could have been anything. You could have been some of the first Paleolithic people, right? Anywhere. There are so many possible beings that you could have been, or even in the future. And then again, a lot of people have this intuitive notion that the future doesn't even exist, or that the past doesn't exist. They think that it's non-existent, and only the present is existent. And that's tremendous confusion, because for you to even have an experience, so in order for you to see a shape which has a color, you already need this information processing to be distributed across time. Because the processing for shape happens at one point, the processing for color happens at another point in time. So the future and the past have to be linked in order for you to even have an experience of a shape with a color, in order to have an experience of a mood and a sensation, and so on. So the future and the past have to exist by relativity, because from the perspective of it's time ticks differently depending on the reference frame of the observers that you're comparing. So that's why it's called the theory of relativity. You have to compare like one reference frame here to some other reference frame here. This one's moving at one rate, and this one's moving at some other rate. And then you have to compare them, and from that, extract a notion of relative time. Here it's going to be ticking at one rate, here it's going to be ticking at another. And so you're going to get different planes of simultaneity, where from his perspective, their plane of simultaneity contains events that are here, and from his perspective, they might be completely slanted. And therefore, you're going to have things occurring in different orders on different planes of simultaneity. So even if you can't actually experience it, even if you can't actually see it, the entire contraption of existence is a mess that contains all past iterations of all narrative streams and all future iterations. Okay, so given all this, how do you defend closed individualism? Well, you don't. You don't. It would be a miracle. So the answer to why am I here as opposed to somewhere else, it's not that it's an invalid question. Some people say it's an invalid question, just don't ask that question. I say it's a valid question and it has an answer. The reason why I find myself here as opposed to here, or as opposed to here, or as opposed to here, why am I not behind the screen as opposed to here? Why am I not some flying Corvette over there as opposed to here, the answer to that is I am. I am there. I am there. I am there. It's the same. Things don't happen to anyone. They are happening to the same screen of the universe. The universe did not endow me with my own particular plasma screen TV for my consciousness at the beginning of, at conception, and then it's going to be destroyed. That plasma screen TV fundamentally is destroyed and has no more images at some other point, and then existence ceases for eternity. That is just a metaphysical remnant of Christianity or Islam or any of these Abrahamic religions that believe in a soul. And it is actually the case that there is just the screen of the universe itself with all these different mind configurations. There's all these different mind configurations, and from the location in each one, I can't tell that I'm the other one, but I am the other one. And so now I have to figure out how to cooperate with all the other fragments of my being who have just as much of a hard time understanding that they are me, fundamentally, that we are the same experiencer. Of course, for practical purposes, you could still choose to cooperate more with those that you expect to be more similar to you than others. So you could say, you know what, I have a particular set of memories that I inherited from configurations that were pretty similar, and across many worlds, there's also a certain narrative stream, a certain body, or a certain set of identifying factors that I tend to like, as opposed to others that I more readily identify with. And so then you define a sort of fuzzy, closed individual. And I say fuzzy because you literally cannot have a line